That's right. But until then, hey, Jim, before we wrap things up, and I want to tell everyone about our fine attorney in a moment, but a few quick things, because we've had a lot of questions coming in about Kast Media, Colin Thomson, LiveOne, Podcast One, and all of this.
There are still things going on and other things to be revealed upcoming in the near future concerning our dealings with these people.
There are a lot of things going on, with us and these matters, a lot of things going on with outside parties and these matters, and you'll be hearing a lot more from us about that, but we've been receiving such feedback. We have heard from probably at least a dozen now former Kast employees. I mean, everyone's a former Kast employee at this point. Former Kast employees talking about their experiences. To a person, every single one of them has a problem with Colin Thomson. Every single one of them thinks Colin did something wrong, either personally to them, usually costing them money, or just overall in general. So that's telling.
Well, and we talked last week about the class action suit that he's on the receiving end of from other former employees accusing him of everything from paying late to not paying at all to conducting basically a slave labor camp and violating every state workplace regulation that it is possible to violate. So he's getting sued there. We're on his ass. The Pod News people chased him down here a week or two ago and wrote an article. There may be more to come there.
Yeah, there may be some more articles to come. We'll see what happens there.
But we haven't actually been talking enough about the other part of this equation, the other alleged weasels that are trying to help him screw everybody out of their money, which we've also found evidence is upwards of $5 million at this point. We haven't been talking about the Podcast One / LiveOne people as much as we should.
No, we're going to talk about them briefly right now. Let me just say on Colin Thomson, again, if you have any information, get in touch with us, CornyDriveThru@gmail.com or Brian@ArcadianVanguard.com. We've heard from former employees, podcasts, obviously, people in St. Louis, people in Chicago, people who know Colin Thomson's family, people who have pointed out some of the crackpot shit his father has put on social media. So there'll be a lot more to come about Colin Thomson, maybe his relationship with his church, whole bunch of things coming about Colin, because Colin took our money. LiveOne, for a reason that we can't fully understand, other than they were trying to get all the Kast assets they wanted on the cheap, decided to dive into the middle of this fray. Colin Thomson and Kast Media owed us money. Colin Thomson incorporated LiveOne in these emails by copying their top executives. Colin Thomson later copied the LiveOne top executive, Rob Ellen, to the emails.
The CEO of LiveOne.
Rob Ellen then proceeded to email Jim Cornette saying he doesn't want anything to do with this fight. However, talk to my team. I don't want anything to do with this. However, I will tell Colin to get you the statements, which we've never received. So there's a lot of this. We're not involved. However, we will instruct the person who is to do what you are saying you want him to do. And we're not involved. However, if you want any chance of getting your money without Colin going into bankruptcy, you better talk to our team.
Which brings up, why in the world would a successful businessman running a publicly traded company that is probably worth just billions and billions of dollars, why would they be so anxious to work with this weasel that is being outed in a variety of news sources as owing people all kinds of money and misrepresenting everything about his business to them? Why, we say?
Yeah, and let's lay it out to what we believe right now, based on the evidence we have, based on everyone we've talked to, based on everything we've seen, everything we've experienced, everything that's documented, everything in writing. We suspect Colin Thomson committed fraud. We suspect Colin Thomson misappropriated our money and the money of many other content creators and / agents and managers and everything else to either inside productions that had nothing to do with the shows that actually earned the money, and he had no right to do that, or possibly outside productions like a mansion in Calabasas or various other things. We suspect fraud. We're being told that in order to be made whole based on their math for the fraud, we would have to accept payment, including stock pre-IPO in Podcast One. LiveOne would be giving us stock in Podcast One to repay us for the money that was lost due to Colin Thomson's fraud.
But now a lot of people might say, well, that doesn't sound so bad. Stock in this big multimedia company, well, that's just got to be worth thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. A lot of people might say that.
Well, we can talk about that, but also some people might say that doesn't sound legal. How could a publicly traded company's stock be used in this manner to repay people for fraud?
Well, especially when it's stock of a company that's not actually fully formed yet. But besides that, the company that would be issuing the stock would still be employing and doing business with the aforementioned Colin Thomson, that was actually the person who committed the fraud and misrepresentation and possibly outright theft to begin with. And these people, including us and all these other people, would have to sign up to work for a company that contained the guy that stole their money.
Can you imagine? I mean, just take any other situation. This guy steals your money. You want to get the money back, you have to go through me. You have to sign a deal with me. You're going to come work on my team. Oh, yeah, by the way, he's going to be in charge. And then we're not going to give you all your money back. We're only going to give you some of it back. The rest of it, over a couple of years, possibly in some stock.
And by the way, in case anybody's saying, this doesn't really have anything to do with wrestling, it does, in terms of that company has had and possibly will have in the future wrestling-oriented podcasts, including major names, if they are so unlucky as to do business with LiveOne/Podcast One. But also, we may not be talking to the wrestling fans now, but we're talking to anybody that has a day job or knows anybody that has a day job over at the SEC. And I'm not talking about the Southeastern Conference. I'm talking about the Securities and Exchange Commission, because we are going to talk publicly about the fraud and malfeasance that's going on with millions and millions of dollars until the SEC decides to look at this Who Shot John deal that LiveOne, Podcast One, and Kast Media and Colin Thomson are trying to put through. And let's just see if it passes all the musters.
Well, Jim, let's take a step back, and I want to go to a few articles and a few press releases from the previous little less than a year, just to lay a little bit of the groundwork as we continue to tell this story in the weeks ahead. I have an article here, October 19th, 2022, on the Music Ally website. Slacker, and just so you know, Slacker Radio is something owned by LiveOne. It's a streaming service. Slacker hit by court judgment over Sound Exchange royalties. Earlier this year, Sound Exchange sued streaming service Slacker and its parent company LiveOne, alleging that Slacker stopped paying statutory royalties in 2017. How did that legal case go? It certainly didn't go well for Slacker. Yesterday, Sound Exchange hailed a court ruling entering a judgment against Slacker and LiveOne to the tune of $9.7 million.
Boom!
The judgment, and this is a quote, permanently barred Slacker and LiveOne from using the statutory license going forward. This, more than the fine, may be the biggest problem for Slacker now in terms of delivering music to its subscribers. And again, this is as of last year. As for the parent company, in quarter two, LiveOne saw its revenues fall by 40% year on year to $23.2 million, although the company did turn a narrow operating profit of $237,000. Those financials included an admission of, quote, substantial doubt about the company's ability to continue as a growing concern within 1 year from the date that these financial statements are filed. Let's stop there. Their statement from a year ago said that they see trouble operating a year from then, which is coming up pretty soon, isn't it?
Well, it does most cases. Most times, years are only 12 months. And by the way, here, this already sounds like a stock that I want to buy in this company. They sound like they're just world beaters. They're beating the customers away with a stick. Go ahead.
There was also a note that at the end of June, I guess as of 2022, Slacker owed $16.9 million in aggregate royalty payments to collecting societies. So the music publishers, or whoever else, aren't able to collect the money they're supposed to collect from the company playing the music on their streaming service. So they're not paying them. This is the company that tried to get us. You said they wanted to get involved with wrestling. They tried to get involved with us, the two biggest wrestling shows on the planet, because they wanted to just They wanted to be involved with this revenue stream. They can't make revenue. So this is from October. 2 weeks later, October 31st, 2022. This is from InsideRadio.com. LiveOne says Sound Exchange royalty judgment would be unsustainable for the company. After being ordered to pony up nearly $10 million in unpaid royalties to Sound Exchange, Slacker's parent company LiveOne claims that paying that amount would financially ruin the company. Here's a quote. The economic damage this will cause LiveOne will be unsustainable for this small company, they say.
Unsustainable for a small... I thought they were big operators, big businessmen, but they're saying they can't even pay that judgment or they'd be out in the street.
They lost the judgment for something they did, which was they stopped paying royalties. They lost the judgment. They have to pay, I'm assuming, prior royalties. Maybe there was penalties. Who knows? They're saying they can't pay that or they will be unsustainable. Let's fast forward a few months. I have an article here. I don't have access to the whole thing, so I'm not a subscriber currently. Billboard.com, March 1st, 2023. Do you remember one of the executives on the email, Kit Gray? I think he was the top guy at Podcast One at that division. Kit
Yes,
Gray?
yes.
Podcast One president faces lawsuit claiming he fired assistant for refusing to ship weed. Sherry Bell says Chris Kit Gray's request that she ship smoking paraphernalia from a marijuana dispensary, including vape pens and vials, violated federal law. So right now he's involved in a lawsuit where his former assistant said he wanted her to send drugs interstate. So we'll see what happens with that. Next article I have here, April 13th, 2023, so a month later, from .la, Podcast One aims to become the first publicly traded podcasting powerhouse. LiveOne, the parent company of Podcast One, just to take a step back, they're afraid they're going to go out of business or they're going to be unsustainable if they have to pay a judgment that they already lost, that they already have to pay. So now they're going to spin off Podcast One into a separate stock. Podcast One, a division of audio streaming and event company LiveOne, is planning to go public in a deal that would make it the first Los Angeles podcast exclusive company to be publicly traded. Several of Podcast One's biggest competitors, iHeartMedia, SiriusXM, and Spotify, already have publicly listed securities. But Beverly Hills-based Podcast One would be the first local podcast company to go public. Here's a quote from Rob Ellen about Spotify.
Come and listen to our story about a man named Rob, a poor little podcast operator that couldn't get a job.
Here's a quote from him about Apple and Spotify. All those guys are our partners. We distribute across all of them, but we're very different. We're a small production distribution house that is laser focused on only podcasting, whereas podcasting is a piece of their business, but it is a much smaller piece of their overall companies. Ellen said that many of Podcast One's creators are also equity holders in the company and stand to benefit directly from the listing.
So he's already jumping ahead and assuming a bunch of people are taking this bogus deal so that he can say that they're equity holders in this fictitious company.
Maybe it's more than that. We have no idea how many existing Podcast One shows, either because they're owed money or for whatever other reason, may have been also given pre-IPO stock in this.
Ah, good point. They may be pulling this across the board.
The CEO also claimed it would give podcast fans a chance to invest directly in the company they care about. Because that's what the listeners want, to go spend their money on stock in the podcast company. What a bunch of shit. Podcast One was launched in March 2007 by Podcast One founder and president Kit Gray and National Radio Hall of Famer, Norm Pattis, who previously ran Westwood One. LiveOne, formerly known as Live by Live, bought Podcast One in July 2020 for $16.1 million. So there's another little wrinkle in the story. 2020, 3 years ago, they buy this thing for $16 million. They're now trying to spin this off into being a stock. The offering that they're saying they want to do would spin out Podcast One as a separate division and expect shares to begin trading at around $8 to $12 each.
Wait a minute, Corny Coin is sounding like a better idea all the time.
Here's another quote from Rob Ellen. We're at 125 million valuation. Overall, as I see this industry, not only are you going to have growth in pure podcasting, but podcasting, live shows, products, and podcasts.
Well, wait a minute. Did he just say that his company is worth 125 million, but they just said when they lost the judgment, they couldn't even pay 10?
They're at 125 million valuation. On paper, to some, they're worth 125 million. How much is that paper
right here,
worth?
I got some paper. Hear that? That's paper right there. And I'm writing down that Corny Coin is worth $150 million. So good day to you. I'm resigning because I'm rich and I'm retiring.
As we are recording, LiveOne today will be announcing their financials, having a big call today. So we'll stay on top of that. But if you have any information, again, CornyDriveThru@gmail.com or Brian@ArcadianVanguard.com. We will continue looking into Colin Thomson, what he did with our money, where that money went, what was his involvement with LiveOne and Rob Ellen and Podcast One. How can Podcast One and LiveOne think they can give people who had money stolen from them stock in a publicly traded company to make them whole from the fraud? There's a lot of questions I want answers to, and I think we're going to get them.
And once again, anybody with the SEC, that's the Securities and Exchange Commission for Wall Street, 60609, we'll be glad to tell y'all a few things too, if you're not already hearing them.
Well, you know who is going to hear a lot of things and who's going to be saying a lot of things about all this? Our good friend and attorney, Stephen P. New.
Well, as a matter of fact, without even any further ado, so that I can get to the big news about Stephen P. New, news about P. New, play that music.
Call Stephen P. If you need to sue. An outlaw mud show or two. He'll sue the rest.
You know what they're calling him now, don't you, Brian?
No, what's that?
They're just calling him P. New. Shit, there comes P. New. Cover your head. Get out of the way. I'm telling you what, when Stephen P. New walks down the street, he takes up the whole thing. He's got wide shoulders and he's knocking everybody over to the side because P. New has now made news again in the state of West Virginia. Governor Jim Justice, Sid's father, and others in the state of West Virginia are being sued for $330 million by Stephen P. New and New Law Office over their horrible treatment of the prisoners in the jails and prisons and juvenile facilities in the state of West Virginia. They want injunctive relief and forcing the state to do $270 million of maintenance at these various facilities and to spend $60 million to fill worker vacancies, because we've been talking about this on and off now for months since Stephen has gotten involved in this. Apparently, the jails in West Virginia, any kind of jail, the overcrowding is ridiculous. The lack of staffing is ridiculous. The lawsuit alleges that 10,000 inmates of the state are living in inhumane condition. The defendants have subjected the inmates housed at all the state's correctional facilities to inhumane living conditions, deprived them of basic human necessities, acted with deliberate indifference towards the health and safety of inmates, bug infestation, starving these people, not attending to their medical care. And the overcrowding has caused inmates to endure genuine privations and hardship over an extended period of time that may give rise to violations of the 8th and the 14th Amendments. And you know, that 14th Amendment, holy shit. You know, people in prison are allowed to drink along with everybody else, one would think. The 14th Amendment taking away the right to alcohol, for heaven's sake.
That wasn't the 14th Amendment.
Oh, maybe that was 19. Nevertheless, there's a lot of amendments in here. But the lawsuit has been filed. Stephen P. New is going to bring the state of West Virginia to their knees of the way that they've been treating these poor, underprivileged inmates and even juvenile inmates, underage, underprivileged inmates. For heaven's sake. So if Stephen P. New will fight the governor of the state and all the high muckety mucks on behalf of prisoners, then certainly he'll fight for you, because you probably, if you're listening to this right now, are a nicer person than an inmate, or at least you're the nicest guy in prison. So if you need help, wrongful termination, damage to you, done financially or emotionally or physically by someone else's negligence, greed, or avarice, newlawoffice.com, 888-692-8084. Operators are standing by. And as soon as Stephen P. New finishes cleaning up the jail system in West Virginia, he will clean up your problem too. He may not be able to get you $330 million, but when we finish putting Colin Thomson under the courthouse, we're expecting at least $12.7 million. Stephen P. New, newlawoffice.com, 888-692-8084.